My guest today is Katie Shannon. Katie is a partner at Heidrich and Struggles, where she has spent over 2 decades advising some of the most important companies in the world on building their leadership teams, working across boards, CEOs, and senior technology executives. She operates at the center of high stakes decisions, helping place leaders into roles that shape entire organizations. And she has built long-standing relationships with many top executives and leaders across industries. What makes Katie particularly interesting is the path she took to get there, from an unconventional start, early childhood adversity, competitive sports, working a range of jobs, traveling extensively around the world, and even spending months on her own in Africa. She ultimately found her way into executive search and built a successful career defined by relationships, trust, and consistency over time. I first met Katie when I was helping a client choose an executive recruiter, and I knew she would be a great zero to prove guest because of her energy, her authenticity, her determination, and her navigating to a moment where she's imagining what's next for her. In this conversation, we talk about her path to becoming a partner at one of the world's top executive search firms, not through a plan, but through a posture that says yes to doors that open, brings all of yourself, and doesn't mistake a transaction for a relationship. This is the story of how she got there and what she's starting to want next. We also get into how she built credibility over time, what she's learned from sitting across the table from top leaders, and how her thinking has evolved as she's reached a point where she has more choice in how she spends her time and her life. This is a conversation about relationships, resilience, and what it looks like to start to design your next chapter once you've already proven yourself. I've always been, since I first met you, always been intrigued, and because you have such an interesting path, which you don't always know when you're in the middle of it. You've worked hard, you've been successful, you've proved something, because you have to get out there, you have to earn it, you have to prove, and then you get to a point where something changes, and you realize you have more choice than you did before. Whatever you choose to do with that choice, it doesn't mean you necessarily leave what you're doing, but your model of being there can evolve because you have optionality, if you were. Because everybody gets to this place, almost everybody, where it's like, okay, it's been great. I've loved where I've been. There's all sorts of things that have been wonderful, but now I'm starting to think about what I want to do with the rest of my life. The life is finite. And for you also, balancing is the wrong word, integrating, family and profession. You have a career that's puts you in the room for a lot of really interesting discussions. So because of the role you have, you get to see people, and you get to see a side of people that a lot of people never see, because you're on the inside of placing. So a lot of people really don't understand how executive search works in reality and what works. So it's like, what's led you to be successful at that? What are the things you learn from people that you see along the way, relationships, and then kind of the lessons. And then you're at a point right now where you may say, you know what, I may just stay here and keep doing this. I may choose other things. In your case, you love fashion. Maybe there's something you can do, but it's really that, it's really the idea of just trying to show different people who've different paths, what are common themes, and then what are different. And so, long-winded version, but what I found is the best is just kind of walk through life of Katie, and then these things come along the way, that the important moments, pivotal moments. And then one person said something which really resonates for me, is those moments when your curiosity overwhelms your fear. So that's it. So tell us about Katie Shannon.
I do feel like I had somewhat of an extraordinary upbringing, as probably everybody does. We all have our stories, right? So I am one of 8 children. I have 4 older brothers and 3 younger sisters, and a super close knit family from the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago. My mom got diagnosed with cancer the day after number 8 was born. And then 2 weeks later had a lung removed and survived for another 2 years, but passed away when we were all between 2 and 14. So I think early on you face adversity and you inevitably start to ask yourself questions at different points in your life, like, is this going to be my story? So I honestly think the first, like when I think about like my life and like I always think about that movie Sliding Doors. Did you see
I
that?
don't know. No, tell me about it.
There's a movie where Gwyneth Paltrow she's living in London, runs down tube, and in one scenario, she makes the train, in one scenario, she doesn't make the train, and they play out both, and so I always think of, like, these moments in life where you had sliding doors and, you either made the train or you didn't make the train, and I think about a moment that happened probably when I was, like, 12, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe 11. I just remember going for a run around the lake that I grew up on and stopping at a point. At least I believe I had this conversation with myself. I don't know if it really happened or not, but it's my memory that I did, in fact, sort of ask myself, like, are you going to just be bummed out? And, is this going to be your story? Are you going to be one of eight that lost their mom? And it certainly is part of my story. But I think at that moment, believe I made a decision that that was going to be part of my story, but it wasn't going to be my story, that I was going to accept it and move forward and be happy.
That's a pretty big choice. That's a pretty big thought exercise at 11 or 12. But
Yeah.
back to your sliding door, you could have also picked the door of not that, and it would have taken you to a
Yeah.
very different place. Yeah, so pretty aware for an 11-year-old.
Well, and I mean, at 11, being the first girl, I think that I stepped into like big shoes. I was cooking, I was cleaning, I
Yeah.
was teaching my sisters what it meant to go through puberty, behind them their first bra. Like I did all that stuff. So it also probably has something to do with why I got married so late in life. But then there was another moment that I have never forgotten, which was I used to go and sit. I had a best friend who was 2 years older than me, and I used to go to her soccer practices and her soccer games. In town, I'm sure everybody knew who we were because we were the eight kids whose mom passed away.
Yeah.
But this didn't come up in this conversation, but this coach came up to me on the sidelines and said, you're here a couple days a week, but you never play. Like, why don't you come and play with us? And I was like, well, I don't even know how to play soccer. Like, I've never played it before. And he's like, I'll just come and I'll teach you. Anyway, long story short, I played for that coach for the next 10 years. He's the guy that took me to Europe for the very first time, convinced me to try out for this national team, and I made it. And I think he is the person that, one, kept me out of trouble for a very long time, taught me teamwork, taught me friendship, taught me trust. It taught me a lot. And for those 10 years, he really became sort of an extension of my dad that I didn't realize that he stepped into. And I don't know if he did it on purpose, if he was just an angel or what, but he was pivotal in my life at an early age and, sent me, I think, in ways that, showed up for the rest of my life. I love international travel. I love learning about other people, other cultures, other religions. And he was the first person that, ever took me out of my hometown, let alone to the Nordics and Russia. And, I learned early on that life was bigger than what I thought.
Well, two things there. One of the things that you talked about, was sports. And one of the things for me is business is a team sport. If you look at successful people in business and successful businesses, people play as a team. They have to be reasonably selfless. They have to know their position. They have to hold each other to a high standard. When you're playing at a high level, you don't get a participation award. You need to
Yeah.
show up. And that opportunity early on taught you the importance of team and the importance of understanding your role, and also helps you understand your own limits. It's a good cap
Yeah.
on ego, and traveling as well. No, I didn't know. So you played on the national team, or at what level did you play?
So I was in high school as a sophomore in high school. Actually, it was my summer between sophomore and junior year, and I tried out for a team. It was an Illinois team, so it was a state team, and there was four teams that went over. It was like I was in the under 15 group, and then there was an under 17 group, and there was two teams for each gender. And it was amazing. I mean, we actually went to Denmark and won the Dana Cup, which
Yeah,
everyone's like, "Wait, Americans even play soccer at the time?"
yeah,
It was not, we weren't known for the sport. But you're absolutely right about teamwork. Like, one, I feel like I was born into a team with seven siblings, and then my dad was one of eight. So I had a huge family around me that was, big in terms of role models for me and just this tribe that I was part of. But it is actually been something that I think is still today big for me. Like I love teaming. I don't love running out on my own. I'm
yeah.
inspired by other people around me. I love kind of leading and coaching and mentoring others. And I always feel like the answer's better with a team than it is, as a solo.
100%. So you got through that, you went to college, and so keep the journey, because there's these moments that stick with you of things that were turning points in life. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I went to college. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then I spent my junior year abroad. I went to Rome. My brothers ahead of me had all done the same thing, so it was sort of like that's what you do. You go spend
Yeah.
your junior year in some other foreign country, and that, of course, just added to my love of travel. And then I graduated from college, and my dad, interestingly enough, used to say to all of us, "Don't go into like the serious path right away. Enjoy yourself, have a little bit of fun, try new things, travel." And I maybe took that a little bit longer than he planned. After college, I moved out to Aspen, and I didn't have a cool, like, ski instructor job. I was a maid at a hotel, so I was a housekeeper, and then I waited tables at night, but it gave me a chance to ski during the day. And then I was a nanny in Coronado during this was during the Gulf War, and I worked for a Navy SEAL who was fighting in the Middle East, and I watched his kids while his wife worked full time. That didn't last too long because I was 22, and I really did not love the idea that I was in charge of 2 little kids. So I
Yeah.
spent the summer doing that and then went back to Chicago where I'm from. And then just a, bunch of Mickey Mouse jobs ended up leading me to Search probably 4 years later. And I just literally did not even know what I was interviewing for, what job I was accepting.
Yeah.
I just knew it paid more than the job I was in, and that
Yeah.
seemed really interesting to me. And I landed in this perfect career for me. It's just been a dream.
Talk about that. I mean, I think talk about that business. What is it that you love? What's success look like? And then what are the things that led up to the things that you've done to get there that you think helped you be successful?
Well, I don't know what I did before Search that led me to be
Well,
successful, but
you talked about, look, somebody who's willing to, what I found, there's a theme, which is people are willing to take jobs without worrying about, yeah, okay, I was a bartender. I was a waiter. I cleaned kennels as a kid. You look, and there's a theme of people who do what it takes in order to do something they want. It wasn't beneath you to go do that. You said, great, this is how I can be there. So there's a set of things which built a work ethic,
yeah.
I'm guessing, that mattered.
Yeah. I just thought I did take one I
Yeah.
took one job. It was a meeting planning job. It was an
Yeah.
association management company, and I was on the meeting planning side of it, which to me sounded super glamorous. Like I was going to travel all over the world and, meet all these interesting people. But really, the reality was I was the first that went to like a convention center, and I was the last one to like turn the lights off. The job was I hated it, but I loved my boss. His name was David Sachs, and he was such a good guy. And so I was too nervous to tell him that I hated the job, but I convinced another girl that worked there to travel the world with me. And I lied and told him I got accepted to the Sorbonne. And he threw this going away party for me, French themed,
Oh, geez.
free champagne. I know. The funny thing is, so I did travel. I went to Europe for a couple months, and then I went to Africa for 6 months. And the girl I convinced to quit her job and come with me did not go to Africa with me. She was not signing up for that. So I traveled around Africa for 6 months, and I was really all around East Africa, all around Lake Victoria. So that was a game changer for me. Like I was on my own in a third world country. I'd never been to a third world country before, and it was just a total game changer for me. But I came back from
Well,
that
it's not
trip.
easy. It's also not easy. It's challenging to begin with. It's harder for a woman, and
Yeah.
just from all kinds of points of view. And so, didn't you go south of there too, though, where you weren't just in Kenya? Didn't you go to South Africa, or did you
I
not go to
did,
South
I
Africa?
so
Yeah.
I fell in love with Africa, so I've now
Yeah.
been there probably 7 or 8 times.
Yeah.
I ended up building a school in Western Tanzania, so I've gone back multiple times for that, and then I rafted the Zambezi River down in
Right
Zimbabwe,
below
which
the
was amazing.
falls.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
amazing,
Yeah.
loved it. I mean, that continent is like, there's just something there, and I know you know this, but there's
Yeah.
something there for me that it just, I don't
It's
know,
primal.
it's like a feeling I've never had anywhere else. It's
There
amazing.
is something deeply connecting and primal in a way that you don't get here.
Yeah, yeah. So I came back. AT Kearney had an executive search arm. So I went to work for them for about 5 years. And my fifth year, they moved me out to the Bay Area. This was during the dot com, and it was a way to, move my career along. And basically, I'd never been to California before. So I was like, I'll go. And I ended up switching over to Heidrich while I was in California. And obviously, I've been with Heidrich for 26 years.
Good, you picked a really good time. I mean, the just at the it might have been a little bit light in the beginning, but they've been able to ride that location.
Yeah. I mean, this industry, you asked me earlier what does it for me. I think if you really love people, there's like no better career because you're just that's all you're doing. You're just spending time with really kind of the top 10% of the leader of our world. And if you're curious, you get to learn all about different industries and
Yeah.
people's paths along and what great leadership looks like, what failure looks like. Like it's just
Yeah,
you really
talk about
never
some of those though, because that's for me, that's one of the things that's so unique about the business you're in and the role you're in and the role you have at Heidrich is you're in relationship with people that's pretty special that you couldn't be there otherwise. And you get to see things from the inside because in order to successfully do what you do, you have to be somewhat of a counselor. And so, but talk a little bit without necessarily naming names. Some of the experiences, some of the experiences, challenges. How did you? Because you've also done super well. What is it that you think how does it work? Just describe the kinds of things, the kinds of projects without giving anything
sure.
away. What do you think is the key that lets you be so good at this?
Listen, I think I work for a firm that is built careers on a meritocracy. So thankfully I'm inside of an organization that is just built to let really a voice from any part of the organization have a voice and try things. And, they put a stake in the ground when I first joined that this was going to be an organization you could build your career on. And that was not necessarily the case in any executive search firm prior to 2000. So I was just a product of like luck in a lot of ways that I happened to land in an organization that I think has an amazing culture and put a stake in the ground to say, hey, you can call this home. We're going to invest in you. You can invest in this place and you'll be able to carve a path as high as you want to go. And so thankfully that's why I've just never had to go anywhere
Yeah.
else. It really has lived that. And I'm surrounded by other leaders that grew up right there alongside me. And now I get to be part of helping grow that next generation, which has been amazing. And I think because of the brand I'm associated with, I get
Yeah.
exposure to, the best of the best, thankfully. So, and that was a big change coming from AT Kearney Executive Search, where I had to spend the first couple minutes describing that, yes, we are a management consulting firm, but we also have a search arm to showing up at Heidrich where, everyone picks up your call.
People know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they pick Heidrich because they want to be at that level. There's this,
Yeah.
there's only a small number of firms. So talk about how it works. Just
Yeah, sure.
describe an engagement, where you're, the kind of roles you're recruiting for, and then just the whole dynamic.
So Heidrich itself, we do everything from the board to the CEO to the CEO's direct reports. I specialize in technology, the function. So everything from product engineering, cyber, AI, IT. And I've done that my entire career at Heidrich. So I've really stayed a path, which I think is part of the reason why I've been able to rise too. I've gotten to know a community
Yeah.
over time. I placed someone at Estee Lauder who I've known for 25 years. So these relationships
Yeah.
last and you get to know someone deeply. They get to know you deeply. They, confide in you. I confide in them. So it's pretty amazing that I can say that I've not only built a career where everyone around me inside my company I've grown up with, but I've also grown up with many of these executives that I work for or place. But I'm, in executive search, a retained executive search, we're hired by the companies to do those roles, whether they're board, CEO, or direct reports. Just going back to the brand, we do, thankfully work with the best of the best, whether it's
Yeah.
private equity or it's venture capital or it's publicly traded, Fortune 100, and we help build those leadership teams. So, we're hired to go in and really understand the organization, understand the situation and where they're trying to take an organization and how to make sure that we help them recruit the best executive possible for the role and for the long haul. For as you know, as in
Yeah.
my case, most tenure of a head of technology is kind of average 5 years. So
Could sit there for a second. So there's some interesting things, that you talk about. You talk about the relationships that you've built both inside, but with clients. You built a professional set of relationships with people, as you said, that you've helped place, and these things are not transactional. Because one of the things I have found about the business you're in is, some of the people are they're transaction delivered. They're focused on, I get it, I'm going to place this person, and then it's less about the relationship and more about, I'll call it, the deal. And so when we first started talking, for me, what was one of the things that impressed me about you is that, that wasn't, you were not a deal seeking person at the highest order. Of course, you have to be to some degree,
maybe I should
but
be more.
no, no, no. You know what I'm talking about, though. I mean, you obviously have done well, but a lot of times, people can smell if the person on the other side of the table really cares about them, or if they don't. So, talk about some of the ones that have worked, and maybe some of the ones that haven't worked, and kind of what you've learned about people and organizations, in the process of this role. Because I found every business has a different playbook, has you learn different things, and so you see things in a way most people don't.
Listen, I think I learned this from my dad. He was always like, you treat people with respect, and you're going to meet the same people on the way up that you're going to meet on your way
Yep.
down, and
Yeah.
treat everybody special and be present. And I really do try. I mean, that's an effort I have to put into that. But as I said earlier, I just think I really, really like people. And so I feel like just in my daily life of whether it's work or whatever, I try to see the person for who they are and invest in that moment in whatever way makes sense. And I think that's probably been a bit of a superpower for me and
Yeah.
how it's helped my career. It's funny. I'm working the snack shack with my son at Little League.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you this for a reason, but the storage unit that they put all the food in,
Yeah.
I was in the storage unit one day and this woman walked in and she's like, "Are you working in the snack shack?" I'm like, "First, I'm trying to make sense of the storage unit. Like, it's insane."
Yeah.
So she ended up helping me and
Yeah.
we organized it. And then I went to work that day in the snack shack and I got an email 2 days later. She was the CHRO of a tech company in Silicon Valley who
Yeah.
was also a mom. And she was like, "You're probably not going to remember me, but I met you in the storage unit. I helped you like regroup it." And she's like, "You just left kind of an impression on me. And I happen to have some searches. We always use this other boutique, but I want to give you guys a shot." I mean, I'm like, "Oh my God, I got work out the snack shack. This is
But
amazing."
it's Buckminster Fuller used to say, God makes no mistakes, and without being religious about it, there is something about the serendipity of kind of how you live, which means that, opportunities come, and then you have to seize them. So I'm going to keep trying to bring you back. So to give me some examples of engagements that have worked, and what was the fact, and ones that didn't, or ones you looked at and said, that's not a gig I want. Yeah, there, you have to have gotten to a place where you're able to say no, maybe not no for the firm, but no for me.
Yeah, I think, early on in my career, I think I thought I always had to show up with the answer. And if I didn't have the answer, I wasn't any good at my job. And certainly, I think, you learn either quickly or after skinning up your knees that
Yeah.
you don't always have the answer. Sometimes clients or people want to actually work it out together with you. And you can both be vulnerable and agree, like, I don't have the answers, but I know I can figure this out with you. That's been refreshing. And I don't even know, I can't tell you the sliding door of when that
Yeah.
happened for me. But I do remember, interestingly enough, a partner of mine that gave me a lot of opportunities. It's literally the transition from being hired as an associate to moving to partner. I worked under this individual. And I remember I had set up all these meetings in New York with big heads of technology. And we were really just trying to get to know the talent so that when we did the work, we knew who these people were.
Yeah.
And so I'll never forget, I set up two meetings. This was right after September 11th when you
Yeah.
could fly again. One was with Morgan Stanley and the other one was with Viacom. I showed up at Morgan Stanley and I knew nothing about financial services. And I am not kidding when I say I knew nothing. He didn't show up for the meeting, but I'm sitting there with the Morgan Stanley CIO, who was not psyched at all that I was wasting her time and let me know it. And I left there after she told me how, just pissed off she was basically. I cried on the side of the building outside of Morgan Stanley and left these terrible messages for the partner who happened to be about the same age as me. So we were like friends, but he was my boss. And then I just had to go to the next meeting, which was at Viacom. And I show up. That guy is the exact opposite. He's showing me where he was when the planes hit. We're having espresso. We're having this very emotional conversation about September 11th. It was the polar opposite. But it was that day that sort of taught me a lesson where, like, I'm going to run into all kinds of people. And it's, the approach is not always going to land perfectly. Some are going to have grace. Some are going to not have grace. And so I think I've taken that day. That probably was a bit of a moment for me where I went forward where, you can be vulnerable. You can say, I don't have the answers. You can't, like, I could have done that with Morgan Stanley. Maybe she could have been like, it's okay. You're young in your career. I'll teach you something today. And then I saw what Grace was with the Viacom head of technology at the time, who was just, amazing. And I knew even less about entertainment and media. But listen, I've had the opportunity to learn from amazing partners at Heidrich. I've been able to make mistakes and learn from them because they took the time to teach me. I've also just worked with listen, I was young coming up at Heidrich, and I think some CEOs that I worked with saw that and said, I'm gonna help this person. I do remember the head of HR at PepsiCo taught me enormous amounts and became one of my biggest clients after watching me go through this transition from principal to partner. He was a reference for me. He was one of the reasons I ended up building accounts and credibility in my space. And it was leaders like him that put me in front of the best of the best. I mean, I was sitting in front of Indra Nooyi, but he was right next to me and he wasn't going to let me fall over. But he was my client.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Those people, people have used terms sponsors, mentors, allies. What you're describing is a really interesting archetype of a client who became a sponsor, and what you could learn from those people. Because there's a theme that I've found pretty consistently for me, but also for a lot of others, is that whatever successes I've had and also whatever failures I've had have been highly linked to the relationships that I have built over time. And so listening to you, you've had an opportunity to be, you wouldn't have had those opportunities if you hadn't been, in the job you're in. When you look at kind of where you are and say, looking backwards from 10 years from now, all right, because I think all of us go through moments, some moments where your head's down and you don't think about this, other moments where you kind of go, what do I want to do with you won't necessarily rest of my life, but next chapter. And so when you look to design, what's next, how do you think about that? Because the reason I thought you would be interesting for the theme of this is zero to prove means you've proven enough so that you are shifting from continuing to prove things for other people to essentially charting your own path, proving things for yourself, which doesn't mean you're going to go be independent. It doesn't mean anything in particular, but it means is you're sort of at source for the decisions that you're going to make about, what your priorities are. So when you, Katie, 10 years from now, looking backwards, what do you want the sort of North Stars to be?
I'm still figuring that out. However, you might have even given me this advice, which is you don't have to have the answer. Just start following doors that open and see where they go. And maybe that ultimately takes you to where you want to go. And I am doing that. I shared with you that I do have like a love of fashion. I don't want to do it for my job, but I think there's ways to bring it into what I do and make maybe my passion mesh with, those that I spend time with and figure out a way to weave it in. And I shared with you the last time we talked that I met Cynthia Raleigh, a fashion designer in New York, back in January. And it was funny. We just had one of those moments where we had a really interesting conversation that ended up lasting like probably 2 hours. And in the end, she said to me, and she's older than me and maybe like reflective of a lot of things in her life where she takes the time to like say things like this. But she said, I feel like you came into this store and you came into my life today for a reason. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, what should we do with it? I'm like, I don't know. And then she's just like, we should throw a party. And I'm like, let's do it. And I did. It
Yeah.
was like that door opened with Cynthia, and I was like, "Well, I'm gonna do something with this." So I threw that party with her 2 weeks ago in New York, and it was a success, and I'm doing another one with her next week in Chicago, and I'm just gonna see where maybe this goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't. Not with Cynthia, but just with the idea of fashion and the world that I'm in.
Well, with both. I mean, I think the thing you're touching on there, and I know I have that, is I come in contact with people. Sometimes it's serendipity, sometimes it's others, and you're like, I would really like to do something with this person.
Yeah.
The energy that comes out of that, and so following those doors. I had a mentor once who was Italian, and he basically said, Americans like to answer questions. He said, Italians understand the importance of leaving questions open sometimes. And it's to this point, you don't need an answer, you can live in the
Yeah.
question. And I think that's where a lot of the magic happens. And so for a lot of people, they're, I don't know if afraid's the right word, but you get settled, you get comfortable, and then, your willingness to try new things for a lot of people goes down.
Yeah, I think back to when I had my kids. I think it was my second. When I had my second, I realized I couldn't operate the same way I did before, and I needed to make shifts. And I think I took a 6-month maternity leave with both of my kids, and it gave me time to like really think about if I'm going to make these shifts, what do I have to do? Well, I have to hire, I want a career. I love my career. So I want to go back, but I can't do it all. So I've got to have help here. And then I also was like, I got to work smarter. And I made a decision for myself, or gave myself permission to make a decision whether or not I was going to be successful at it. I didn't know, which was I was going to do the biggest and best heads of technology out there. I wasn't going to do, there was going to be a threshold of what I was going to get involved in and where I was going to spend my time. And so that was the first time where it took like a year to convince myself, to convince others, to convince clients, and then to make that shift. But then once I made that shift, I was like, wow, I made it way harder for myself than I needed to. And now I think the luxury of having performed for as long as I have at Heidrich, I have a lot of people that sort of bet I'm going to keep doing it. And so it gives me a chance to maybe rethink things.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, and if our CEO or president ever listens to this, I always say, I think I've got 3 years to really kind of like not do well before they're going to kick me out of here.
It's
But
like,
I've never not done well, so I know I'm gonna do okay, but I am gonna try to take that time to pause and maybe redirect when I feel like I should, because
yeah.
it worked the time that I did it. And I feel like I'm at that point now where I've been doing this a long time. Absolutely love it, but I love challenges. I like newness. Right now, I love the idea of longevity. I like health, really investing in my health and keeping myself healthy and energetic. I've got 2 little kids that I had at a later age, so I gotta do that. But also, I just feel like there's a different season out there for me. There's a new season. I just have to figure out, what it looks like. So I'm still sorting it out.
Well, you described a process, even if that wasn't how you meant it. There was a step when you took this pause where you realized, I don't want every piece of business I can have. I'm going to be selective with my time and my energy. And I'm going to say, I'm either going to say no to things, or I'm, whatever the right, term was. But you weren't saying no for the firm, you're saying no for Katie. And so there was a beginning of filtering that you started to do, which is, I only want to engage on certain type of things. And that worked, but just listening, it feels like that was the beginning. And now you're just saying, and I want to have other things in my life. And I want to design a life. And I think that's the thing for me when I talk to people is you get to a point where you feel enough agency of designing your own life, as opposed to having to follow whatever the path is. You talked about, the door, sliding doors, but there's opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even making that decision after having my second, it wasn't easy. Like, I remember having like a one-sided fight with my nanny. She never knew I was mad at her, but I was mad at her for taking like part of my mom job away from me. And then I had to realize, like, I'm the one that made this decision to continue with my career, and I'm the one that made a decision like I needed help. Why am I mad at her that she's given my kids a bath? Like, I need the help. But every time I've taken risk or pivoted. I think I've continued to grow. I think I've learned enormous amounts with every one of those pivots.
Yeah.
And I probably get a bit of an endorphin high every time I do it. Like it's awesome.
That's another interesting one is do you recall ones that haven't worked? I have a bunch.
Yeah.
So yeah, talk a little bit about it because I think the thing is everybody I know that's been successful has also, had a lot of failures. I mean, it was I think Babe Ruth had both the home run record and the strikeout record, but he was swinging. And so, what are some examples of ones where, you took a flyer and it just didn't work?
I have a doozy. I won't use the company name, but let's just put it's one of the biggest and most recognized brands in the world. And I was working for them and I, pushed back on some things that I thought were going to be obvious hurdles in the market. And they didn't love that at all. And I think they felt like, I think what they heard was if you don't do these things, you won't get what you want. But that wasn't what I was trying to say. I was trying to explain hurdles that I think we were all going to go through and how do we get to the other side of that hurdle? Just because I'd been there before, I knew what it was going to look like. And the hardest part was we did get to the finish line, but then another really big job opened up at that same organization. And they had said to a partner of mine, we want to give it to Heidrich, but she cannot be on it. And I was the right person for it. And that was super hard. It was a hard conversation for my partner to have with me. It was super hard for me to like, oh my God, one of the biggest brands in the world has basically said they will give the work to another firm if I'm involved.
What did you take away from that?
I think what I said earlier, you're going to meet people like the CIO of Morgan Stanley that is going to choose to view the world the way that they view it. And you're going to have others like the guy at Viacom. And this one for me was, they didn't really want to be challenged. They didn't want what I think I'm best at, which is I'm on your team, but I'm also here to make sure that we're all looking in the mirror and we recognize what we're looking at, because if we don't, it's going to be a tough journey to pretend the whole way and find out at the end that these things are there.
That authenticity is critical because I think there's a lot of people who still operate under the premise that you have to please everybody, and I think it's a version of what you talked about, earlier of only wanting a certain type of profile clients. I think the other thing is you want clients that are going to I have a friend who says I want to work with people who are going to listen to me. They're going to respect. I don't have to be right, but we're going to have a relationship based on mutual respect. And if people won't listen to you, you're not going to, as you said, there's not a fit. Some people can get knocked down by those things.
I'm usually really good with CEOs because they're used to nobody telling them they're wrong. And I'm just not afraid to say, not that you're wrong, but hey, this is going to be a problem. And I think I end up getting along really well with CEOs because I'll give them that. I'm going to give them everything that they hope to get out of, us as a partner, but I'm not going to be a yes person. I'm going to tell them the truth. And I think a lot of CEOs do find themselves surrounded with people that just want to tell them what they think the CEO wants to hear. At least that's what CEOs have said.
That's been my experience as well. I mean, I think your ability to be authentic, because I think the thing for me here is that, what are the themes? You're willing to take risks. You're willing to be authentic. You're willing to say no, and now you're at this place where you're another one of those moments, we're trying to design, where you go from here. Does fear come up for you at all? Or what's the nature of a fear that comes up when you think about these things?
Yeah, I'm sure it does. But I also, to be honest with you, I do remind myself like, hey, do you remember that book, Everybody Poops?
Yeah,
If you read it.
it was like I think I did, but yeah.
So I do remind myself, like, at least right now, humans still bleed. We all bleed. We all poop. Like, I try to remind myself, like, just because they're sitting there running this company and I'm, who I am, doesn't mean that I'm not worthy of the
Yeah,
collaboration or the conversation or
yeah.
whatever. But there are times where I'm like, yeah, I'm nervous. Maybe it's, I don't feel like I know as much as I should when I go in the room, going back to what I said earlier. I don't know. I probably, my dad used to say that I was so clueless in a lot of ways and naive that it ended up carving a path that I wouldn't have gone down if I did take the time to like back up and really understand what I was about to do. So maybe naivety is bliss in a lot of ways.
It's not having a lot of preconceived notions. I think there's a willingness to just lean in. You described, especially, the first part of your life, you were just leaning in. I'm going to go here, I'm going to try those things. And that establishes a pattern. I mean, I know I had, I had my own version of this, but living outside the country, traveling, being in third world places, and then just also realizing that fear of trying things was going to be the biggest limitation, as opposed to trying something and it not working. And so, you've tried a lot of stuff and it's worked out well. So from a kind of parting things, if you were gonna, if you were gonna use the opportunity to say, look, looking back at, at the things that you've learned, what would you kind of come up with as kind of foundational things of what's enabled you to get to where you are, and to get to the optionality that you have?
Well, we just got done with a conversation about fear, but yeah, I did have fear that I would never live past 43. And so I think I went into life with almost no fear because I thought it was going to be pretty short.
Yeah, so your mom, that's how old your mom was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I lived large and I didn't get married until about that same time. And part of it I think was like I'm going to live, not that I always thought I would get married. I always thought I would have kids. I never really was like gunning to be a partner at the firm. I remember the partner I worked for was like, "You're already doing a lot of these jobs. Like you should go to the next job." And I was like, "Well, I don't really want the sales target." So I didn't have all these. I had like goals, but not stakes in the ground. Like I'm going to be a partner at Heidrich and Struggles, or I'm going to have get married and have a kid at 30. I just was trying to like see what was in front of me, embrace it, follow my curiosity, and have fun and enjoy the maybe short life that I thought I was going to have. And then I didn't have a short life. I'm still here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think like messages, I think it was be present and take every day for what it is and enjoy the privilege of the those that you get to meet along the way and the privilege that they have to meet you and just bring 100% of you every day to
Yeah.
whoever, you get to spend it with.
Those are some, very simple, but I think very profound insights. Well, look, thank you. Thank you very much.